What is peace? Often, the answer varies depending on who you ask. Peace is often described in conceptual terms as being the absence of war or violence, but others see peace as a symbol standing for harmony, tranquility, and unity. Johan Galtung also sought to uncover the meaning of peace. He contends that in order to develop a true understanding of peace, we need a more nuanced understanding of violence. Galtung defines violence as being the disparity between an individual's potential and actual, or as he states, between what could have been and what is. An example he uses is where a young individual dies from tuberculosis. This to Galtung would be a form of violence, as it could have been preventable with all the medical resources societies possess today. But instead, the individual failed to reach their utmost potential in life. This is a type of structural violence. The remainder of this video will explore what structural violence really is and provide some contemporary examples to contextualize this concept. This can be made better understood through looking at the structure of an iceberg. First, there's direct violence, which is merely the visible tip of a much larger iceberg of violence, much of which is hidden from sight but is necessary in sustaining and giving rise to direct violence. This is the most visible type of violence, as the perpetrators themselves are humans, causing damage directly upon others. Direct violence can range from threats and psychological abuse to killing. Then, there's cultural violence. Cultural violence and structural violence reside in the invisible part of the iceberg. Cultural violence is a symbolic violence expressed in countless forms, through religion, ideology, language, art, science, media, education, and serves to legitimize direct and structural violence. Films and video games that approvingly show the use of violence to resolve conflict is one example. Religions and ideologies that condone violence towards non-believers or opponents is another. In other words, the cultural machineries of a society may hinder us from identifying direct or structural forms of violence when prevailing attitudes condition feelings of superiority based on class, race, sex, religion, and nationality. Lastly, there's structural violence, which will be the main topic of conversation during the remainder of this video. Many of us tend to associate the word violence with only direct forms of violence, such as wars, terrorist attacks, crimes, extremism. But there is a more invisible and destructive form of violence that often goes unacknowledged. Structural violence becomes so normalized within society that its presence isn't always felt. It occurs when social, economic, and political structures privilege certain classes, races, ethnicities, genders, and nationalities over others, by giving them greater access to goods, resources, and opportunities, while the marginalized are harmed and prevented from fulfilling even their basic needs. It is violence being imposed indirectly through the system. Some historical examples include colonialism and slavery. According to Galtung, often causes of direct violence are related to structural violence, and both of these are then justified by cultural violence. Let's use some recent examples from the US to better help explain this concept. The ongoing water crisis in Flint, Michigan illustrates how structural violence can affect the ability to meet basic human needs through the manifestation of environmental racism. In Flint, the majority of the population is African American, and around 40% of its residents are living below the poverty line. The lead-polluted water has caused many short-term health problems such as rashes, hair loss, and waterborne illnesses, as well as the potential of causing long-term health problems including delayed cognitive development and mood disorders. Governor Snyder and many state officials neglected to address this issue that was well known in 2014, until finally the damage had become insurmountable and a state of emergency was declared 2 years later. Could we see this problem arising in a wealthy and predominantly white city? It looks like the mess isn't only in the water. The Flint crisis uncovers the innate pollution in the social and political institutions that perpetuate discriminatory thought that are oppressive particularly to people of color. The lack of environmental protection in Flint is a prime example of structural violence, where marginalized are hindered from accessing essential resources vital for their well-being, which in turn limits their potential in life. Moving on, the racist and divisive executive orders enacted by President Trump will only further add to the structural violence nationally and globally. Decisions to deny entry to green card holders, citizens, and dual citizens from various Muslim-majority countries including Libya, Yemen, Syria, Iran, Iraq, Sudan, and Somalia into the US grants considerable disadvantages to specific racial identities. Those from non-Muslim countries do not have to face this oppression, as their survival, families, careers, and general well-being would not be put into jeopardy in the same way. Would you see a primarily white Christian country facing discrimination many Muslim countries are? Islamophobia has long been a pervasive ideology in the US through the constant negative portrayal of Muslims in the media. The media is merely one dimension of how Islamophobia seeps its way into the notion of cultural violence, which legitimizes the structural violence we see operating through the political sphere. With many of the current events playing out, structural violence is becoming more and more embedded into the fabric of society. Is there a solution to any of this? Will the volatile environment of America raise everyone's awareness of such structural inequalities? Will true change only come from a complete transformation of institutions? One place to start is through having discussions of the predominantly institutional nature of violence and engage as many people as possible. While contemporary events may feel tumultuous and destined for history books, now is the time more than ever to begin having conversations on issues that are likely to affect you. As Martin Luther King Jr. said, our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter.